A damp start for western Scotland, northern England and into Wales, and that rain will continue to push through during the day. The most persistent and heavy bursts for parts of northwest Scotland, northwest England and northwest Wales. It will turn patchier further to the east, and actually southern areas of England towards the southeast may stay dry throughout the day, but still rather cloudy compared to of late. That rain continues to push its way through, but there's further weather fronts and low pressure systems waiting in the wings out in the Atlantic to bring us relatively unsettled conditions throughout the rest of the week. So further rain at times, temperatures around the high teens to mid-20s. Bye-bye.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
It's 9 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my big opinion, politicians have not been straight with us about the economy and now we're all paying the price. Britain is broke, but I'll be telling you how we fix it. My Mark Meets guest is a hijack survivor on a 1986 Pan Am flight whose life was spared by a terrorist on board. He reveals why and tells his incredible story before the end of the hour. The guy is a walking miracle. You won't want to miss it. In my Take at 10, why are Tories drawing up plans to let children change their sex at school? Who's going to save our children from this dangerous path? So So a busy 2 hours to come. Get the kettle on, get the kids in bed, and I'll see you after the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Mark. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom. Good evening to you. The attempted mutiny in Russia has exposed real cracks in Vladimir Putin's authority. That's according to the US Secretary of State. The leader of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, ordered his fighters to halt their march on Moscow and withdraw from Rostov in an amnesty deal, which will result in his exile to Belarus. Antony Blinken says the turmoil caused by the rebellion could take months to play out, but is likely to affect Moscow's capabilities in Ukraine.
To the extent this presents a distraction, a loss of focus for the Russians, that may help the Ukrainians on the battlefield. Exactly where this goes, we don't know. But what we do know is that we've seen real cracks emerge. Again, a direct challenge to Putin's authority.
Now, while the immediate risk to President Putin appears to have been contained, emergency security measures remain in place in Moscow, as Russian journalist Alexei Weir told GB News earlier.
Everything has been resolved. It seems that the catastrophe has been avoided. We still do have some extra law enforcement here on the streets, and they are wearing some heavy gear, for example, bulletproof vests and helmets. They have machine guns, which is unusual. But as you can see here, life continues. The situation here in downtown Moscow doesn't seem any different from the usual. The Red Square is still closed, but other than that, everything seems fine.
A 15-year-old girl has died after being pulled from the sea at Cleethorpes Beach in Lincolnshire. A 15-year-old boy who was also airlifted to hospital has since been discharged. Separately, a 5-year-old boy has died after falling from a harbour wall in the Cornish town of Padstow. Police are treating both incidents as accidental. The Duchess of York is recuperating following a successful operation to treat breast cancer. Sarah Ferguson was recently diagnosed with an early form of cancer after a routine mammogram, having been symptom-free. She was released from hospital earlier and is now recovering with her family in Windsor. The Met Office is warning people to enjoy the good weather at the moment responsibly. It is after the forecaster recorded the joint hottest temperature of the year earlier, with 32.2 degrees in Coningsby in Lincolnshire. Thunderstorms and heavy showers are expected, though, later on in some parts of the country. And in about a couple of hours' time, it will be goodbye Yellow Brick Road in this country at least. Sir Elton John is closing Glastonbury by headlining the Pyramid stage. It will be his final UK gig, 53 years after his first. Now, it should be underway any time now. Sir Elton's promised several special guests, one of them rumoured to be Sir Paul McCartney. He's also promised to open with a song that he hasn't played in the last 10 years. And that is rumoured to be Pinball Wizard. Speaking of which, now it's over to Mark.
Who needs Elton? I'm still standing. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. In my big opinion, politicians have not been straight with us about the economy, and now we're all paying the price. Britain's broke, but I'll be telling you how we fix it. In the big story, why are the government slapping a green levy of £170 on hard-pressed Brits? And as GB News star Lee Anderson says the next election will be decided on the culture wars, I'll be asking best-selling politics professor Matthew Goodwin all about it. My Mark Meets guest is a hijacked survivor on a 1986 Pan Am flight, whose life was spared by a terrorist on board. He reveals why and tells his incredible story before the end of the hour. The guy is a walking miracle. You won't want to miss it. In my take at 10, why are Tories drawing up plans to let children change their sex at school? Who's going to save our children from this dangerous path? And 7 years on from Brexit, with the fastest growth in the G7 over the last 2 years, record trade with the EU, and with Britain avoiding recession unlike the Eurozone, have Remainers been proved wrong at last? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, politics legend Anne Widdecombe. Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of the papers, with tomorrow's front pages from 10:30. With three top pundits who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script. Tonight, Annunciata Rees-Mogg, Nigel Nelson and Neil Hamilton. Tonight I'll be asking the pundits, is the NHS losing the war on obesity? Should children be banned from weddings? And is there anything wrong with sunbathing naked in your back garden? Plus your emails, especially the spicy ones, mark@gbnews.com. And this show has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Plus I can still hit all the high notes. A very busy 2 hours to come. We start with my big opinion. We all have those tipping point moments, don't we, when we realise something isn't right, that you've crossed the line. Like those holiday snaps in which you suddenly realise it's time to go on a diet. Well, an unflattering statistic about the UK economy slipped below the radar this week amid all the noise around interest rates and Vladimir Putin's short-lived army rebellion. It's the horrifying statistic that the UK's total government debt reached more than 100% of the size of the economy in May, sitting at a terrifying £2.6 trillion. Yes, you need the word trillion now because billion just doesn't cut it. The debt pile is now 100.1% of the nation's gross domestic product. We are in the full throes of a profound economic crisis. Raging inflation, soaring debt, and interest rates rising exponentially, impacting mortgage holders and sucking money out of the economy as people pay more on home loans rather than purchasing goods and services. Renters in our great cities already pay too much thanks to the failure of successive governments to build, baby, build. And they will be further impacted as landlords pass interest rate increases onto them. Repossessions will increase, which is a tragedy for the families and individuals involved, and the dream of home ownership slips further from the reach of millions of Brits. Of course, we know how we got here. Years and years of money printing, thanks to the likes of ex-Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who hilariously blames Brexit. Of course he does. Of course, what it really was the bonkers decision to borrow £500 billion in a wildly failed experiment to stop a seasonal respiratory virus. One potentially nasty, yes, but mild or non-fatal to most. Let's not forget, we paid perfectly healthy people a large portion of their salaries to stay at home. Well done, everyone. So where do we go from here? Well, it couldn't be simpler. It's time for an all-out war on inflation, because this evil stealth tax is like an atomic bomb. It nukes the whole economy, spiking the costs of goods whilst reducing the value of money. And the only lever, one which should have been pulled by that prize numpty Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England years ago, is to crank up interest rates. The government are effectively going to have to damage the housing market and may need to more or less provoke a recession later this year by design in order to tackle the tsunami of rising prices. This may seem drastic or even reckless, but so does chopping your leg off until it means saving your life. We all know about Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, and by far the most important one is to tackle inflation. Rising inflation is a vicious circle, but falling prices is a virtuous one, in which goods become easier to buy, and the value of people's wage packets and the pound in their pocket increases in value. High inflation is a lose-lose, low inflation is a win-win. It's the ultimate tax cut, which is why, in a huge test of his leadership, Rishi Sunak must stand up to the union barons and their inflation-busting demands. This whole story and the inflation has implications for public sector workers' wage demands. To yield to what they're asking for, we'll see inflation baked into the system for years to come. Now, the likes of nurses and teachers clearly deserve a bump. They do great work. But the government must strike a balance between individual wage demands and the wider needs of the economy. Tackling the cost of living is the only show in town. The inflation, the national debt and sky-high interest rates prove that Britain needs to change course. And it's not just wage discipline or the painful medicine of rate rises. There is one other issue that no politician in the country is brave enough to tell you, so I will tell you. This country, this great country of ours, lives beyond its means. You know about balancing household income. You know what's coming in and what's going out. But those wonderful, wise people that lead us are happy on our behalf to live on the never-never, saddling future generations with debts and liabilities to pay for current commitments. It's ultimately a Ponzi scheme so egregious it would have notorious financial crook Bernard Madoff blushing. So if you're serious about tackling inflation, reducing that debt, and getting the country back onto a sustainable path, you're going to have to cut, cut, cut. Extraordinary waste in the public sector, yes, including the NHS, must be addressed. People proudly boast that our health service is the biggest employer in Europe. That's not something to celebrate. That's an admission of its wild inefficiency. Britain needs to go on a financial and economic diet. It's time to slim down public spending and perform liposuction on our bloated public services. Britain needs some tough economic love. And for those that don't like it, tough luck. Your reaction, Mark at GBnews.com. Let's get the views now of my top pundits. I'm delighted to welcome former MEP and political commentator Annunziata Rees-Mogg, the leader of the UK Independence Party, Neil Hamilton, and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Neil Hamilton, let me start with you. The elephant in the room is that this country lives beyond its means.
Well, that's true. Government's borrowing is still huge, 100 billion a year. You know, these are colossal sums, which even 20 years ago we would have had virtual heart failure to accept.
And here's the thing, it's unethical, isn't it, to saddle that debt onto future generations?
No, it's grossly immoral, but of course governments of all persuasions at various times have resorted to this practice, with one honourable exception being the Thatcher government in the 1980s, where we got the public sector finances under control and had a virtuous circle of lower taxes, higher growth, and therefore we kept public spending growing, but not increasing the government deficit. So that's what we need to get back to, but I see no signs of any of the current major parties having any idea how to do that.
Yes, indeed. Well, that's the concern. Nigel Nelson, Britain is broke, and we've got to talk about public spending. We live beyond our means.
Well, there are other ways of getting inflation down. Obviously, that the bluntest tool is simply to raise interest rates, which is what they're doing. You mentioned, in fact, wage demands as being one of the drivers of inflation, which you're absolutely right, it is. But the reason for that is a really tight labour market. So wages are running about between 6 and 8% a year, and that's because employers need to actually offer them to get workers in. Now, we could do some unpopular things. We could relax immigration rules, bring in foreign workers who would be cheaper. That would lower wages. You could also take money out of the economy by raising taxes, but the Tories are not going to do either because both are pretty unpopular.
Well, of course, taxes are currently at about the highest level since the war, so they can't go much higher. Even Keir Starmer has said he won't raise the top rate of tax should he get into number 10. But don't you think it's time politicians were honest about the situation?
Well, I think they're being honest about it in the sense that inflation is a real problem, and people.
I don't know about that. I mean, your mate Keir Starmer, he's going to be splashing the cash when he gets into number 10, apparently. All the public sector are going to get a pay rise. There's going to be huge investment in green technologies, renewables. It's going to be a bonanza.
Well, the argument is that with the green technology, he has actually rowed back about spending 28 billion on it for the first year.
Another U-turn.
Which I was a bit disappointed about, I have to say. But the whole point about that is the way towards economic growth. If you believe in the idea that we need green industry, you invest in that, it would create at least 65,000 jobs to begin with, and if that works, then economic growth follows.
Surely we need to be a business-friendly, open, free economy in order for companies to want to invest here. And at the moment, we're not. We're taxing above our competitors. We are pricing ourselves out of the market. Our labour costs are high. Our energy costs are far higher than our competitors. And our taxes are too high as well. We need to grow, but we need to allow businesses to invest so that we can, and that is the way out of inflation.
Absolutely right. And we have the highest tax burden today since the Attlee government in the late 1940s. And the way to get economic growth is not have artificially expensive energy. Quite the opposite. The Industrial Revolution occurred because of Britain's abundant and cheap energy. In those days, of course, through coal and wood. Today, what we're doing, in fact, is pricing ourselves out of the world market, a mistake that India, China and all the other countries are very happy for us to take this sort of self-harming approach, are very happy to endorse.
And Annunciata, a shambles that this has happened on the Conservative watch.
It is. I think that you have to take our fiscal policy and our monetary policy in combination, and the Bank of England has to shoulder a lot of this blame. Quantitative easing has fuelled it beyond belief.
Too right. Nigel, final thought.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on the quantitative easing thing, again, there was once you'd actually given all that money during COVID, whether you believe that was the right thing or not, 23% of our national income compared to France at 13%. Once you'd done that, quantitative easing was the only option. But you're right, the bank didn't actually act early enough by raising interest rates when they should have done.
And never stopped after 2008. Anyway, it just carried on pumping more money in, and of course that's ended
Which
up
was another
inflation.
time when you actually needed to get the money into the economy.
Well, we've got in trouble again with the bankers, this time the central bankers. What do you think? Does Britain live beyond its means? Coming up next in the big story, why are the government slapping a green levy of £170 on hard-pressed Brits? Plus, by the way, do you think the next election, as Lee Anderson says, will be won on so-called wokeism and the culture wars? I'll be asking top professor Matthew Goodwin. All of that is next.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. Your emails very shortly, but first it's time for the big story. And households will pay a £170 a year green levy on energy bills in the coming days, with Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt accused of slyly shifting costs back to consumers. The Telegraph report that the 2-year suspension of green levies announced last autumn is to end from the beginning of July, after just 9 months, saddling hard-pressed Brits with more cost. Is this green levy justified? Let's get the views now of the director of Net Zero Watch, Andrew Montford. Andrew, your reaction to this?
I see this as shuffling the deck chairs, actually. They've moved it from taxpayers to consumers. Yes, they've tried to hide the fact that they've done it. This was done very, very quietly, and a lot of praise must go to the Telegraph for actually exposing what they've done. But in reality, it's not really going to make a very great difference at all, because it is just, the cost is still there. It's just been moved from one place to the other. And at the end of the day, you know, sort of continuing on from the what you were talking about before the break, if we're going to get inflation down, we need to get our energy costs down, which means we have to actually reduce the underlying costs. We can't be just trying to hide them. That isn't going to get us anywhere. So if Rishi Sunak is serious about the inflation problem, he needs to be looking at actually moving away from renewables, because the evidence is now quite clear that renewables, and particularly wind power, are incredibly expensive. There has been a huge multi-year campaign to convince the public that wind power is becoming very, very cheap. And Nigel on your panel there has clearly believes it. It simply is not true. There's been a whole series of people, myself included, who have analysed the financial accounts of every single offshore wind farm in the UK, and there is no sign of the costs coming down in any significant way. This is why our energy bills had almost doubled in the 20 years before the Ukraine war. From the time of the renewables obligation coming in 2002 to the eve of the Ukraine war, energy prices, electricity prices had doubled. That is what cheap renewables have done for us. So if we want to get back to cheap energy and a vibrant economy, we need to be moving away from those renewables and going back to more sensible solutions. That's the only way we're going to get our economy back.
Well, Andrew, I'm all for falling back on fossil fuels. We have enormous resources on our own shores. However, we need an energy mix, don't we? We need nuclear and we need some renewables as well. Britain is a world leader in green tech. The government would argue that this 170 quid a year is going towards future energy supply.
Well, the green levies are essentially subsidies to wind farms, is the guts of it. Now, in the 20 years that we have been subsidising them, the costs, well, they went up for the first 10 years, and they have come down a little bit since. Now, the question is, those subsidies were put in supposedly to start the industry up, to get it over those first few difficult years, and then they go away and it would all be super cheap. It hasn't happened. The question is, when are the subsidies going to stop? And in reality, the truth is that the renewables are never going to be cheap enough, because they make the rest of the system so inefficient. So when you say we need some renewables as well, I would say, no, we absolutely don't need some renewables as well, apart from a small amount of hydro that we already have. And unfortunately, there isn't scope for expanding that. If we had lots of empty valleys that we could flood, I would say, fine, let's go and do lots of hydro. Wind, solar, no. The costs that it imposes on the whole system are so great, you just wouldn't want to do them. So yes, let's go back to fossil fuels because they are reliable. We need to be looking at shale gas again, and we need to be reinvigorating our nuclear program. The nuclear program is grinding back into action, but it needs to be done with a lot more determination. We need to be looking at small modular nuclear reactors. These possibly will be much, much cheaper than the big reactors that we're doing. And but we also need to hold our nerve on the big reactors. Yes, the ones we're doing are expensive, But if we do 2 or 3 of them, number 2 will be cheaper and number 3 will be cheaper still, and so on. That's what they do in countries like Korea. They keep building them again and again and again, and then they get cheaper. So there is a way forward that will be not zero carbon, it will be lower carbon, but the government isn't interested. They are in the grip of the green lobby. There are too many Conservative MPs who have a religious commitment to the green agenda, and they're not going to let go, no matter what the pain to the consumer. And that is the problem that the Conservative Party faces.
OK, Andrew, great to have you on the show again. We'll catch up soon. Andrew Montford is the director of Net Zero Watch. Your reaction, Mark at gbnews.com. Speaking of GB News star, our brand new presenter, Conservative MP Lee Anderson, has revealed on his new show that he believes the so-called culture wars will decide the outcome of the next general election. Is he right? Or are concerns about political correctness and woke ideology irrelevant as people struggle to pay their bills? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Matthew Goodwin, author of the best-selling book Values, Voice and Virtue, The New British Politics. Matthew, with people struggling with the cost of living crisis, why do the culture wars matter?
Well, they matter for lots of reasons, Mark. I think if you've been watching the newspapers this week, you will have seen the big debate that we've had over what we're teaching children in Britain's schools about sex and gender. We now have children, for example, identifying as cats and other animals, and schools essentially embracing gender identity theory. Mums and dads up and down the country do care about this issue. It's not as important to them as things like the cost of living crisis or immigration, but it is definitely on the agenda. And I would just say, Mark, if you look at American politics at the moment, all of those issues are really in the top 3. And that's because politicians have really been willing to talk about them, to actually have a conversation with the country about them. And I think probably what Lee is saying is, look, if the Conservatives were clever at this point, they would be trying to talk to voters' concerns about those very issues.
Indeed so. I suppose you're characterising it, the woke issue, the culture wars, as the dark horse issue of next year's campaign. Do you think Rishi Sunak is the man to embrace the anti-woke message?
Well, the first thing, Mark, I would say is I personally don't like the term culture wars for the reason that we're talking about the rights of women, we're talking about the rights of children, we're talking about our history, we're talking about our identity. And the language of culture wars implies that this stuff is somehow bad, that we shouldn't be talking about it. And I think that, even to use that phrase is to kind of embrace the language, if you like, of the kind of woke progressive. So I don't like using that term. Rishi Sunak has shown himself willing to intervene on some of these issues. In Scotland, for example, he intervened against the gender recognition reform bill. He's been pushing for a review of what's happening in schools. But to be honest with you, Mark, I'm slightly sceptical of some of his appointments. I don't think Gillian Keegan has been a particularly good education secretary so far. She's certainly not been in touch with the views of many Conservative voters about these issues. And I think if you really want to get a handle on why people are concerned, what they feel is that their children and fellow citizens are being exposed to radical ideologies which often have no basis in science. It's almost as if the adults have left the room. And I think there are lots of people who are looking at this revolution sweeping through Britain, because that's what it is, Mark, it's a revolution. And I think they are asking themselves, who's in control of this? Where are these ideas coming from? How are we going to hold these shadowy organisations to account that are coming in and teaching our kids all of these things? Now, if the Conservatives jump on those issues and talk about them, they will find lots of receptive voters who want to have a conversation about them. If they instead ignore them and they sound a lot like the Labour Party on those issues, they're not going to get much benefit at all from them at all. So my view would be, look at America, look at what's happened there, and look at how these issues have gone mainstream.
Indeed so. And you have to ask, who is pushing this radical ideology? Well, it's the media, corporate and political elite who feature very much as key characters in your book, Values, Voice and Virtue, The New British Politics, which is really the most talked about political book of the year so far. It's a cracking read. But you're great on Twitter as well, because you can be found at GoodwinMJ. And Matthew, you broke the internet this week by pointing out that now that Brexit has happened, you live in a proper democracy. But this triggered a few people. How so?
Well, it turns out that many of the people who absolutely hate Brexit and love the European Union don't really know how the European Union works. The EU is not a genuine democracy, Mark. Genuine democracies do three things. They give people free and fair elections. They give them representation in a parliament, in a legislature, and crucially, they allow them to influence who controls the executive office. The EU only does two of those things. It's almost impossible for citizens across the EU to influence the executive and many of the decisions coming out of it. So I merely pointed out that in the aftermath of Brexit, we do now live in a genuine, healthy, self-governing democracy. You might not like who's running that democracy at the moment. You might not like Rishi Sunak. You might not like the Conservatives. You might not like some features of that democracy, like the House of Lords. But you can vote to change all of those things. You can vote for a party. You can vote for a manifesto. Citizens in Greece or Italy or Spain often cannot influence the decisions that are affecting their daily lives on big sweeping issues. And that is ultimately, of course, one of the big reasons why we left. I'm just shocked that 7 years on from the referendum, Mark, I have to explain these very basic points to apparently very intelligent, enlightened, diehard Remainers who apparently love the European Union and everything about it, but don't seem to understand how it actually works.
Yes, you get a lot of pushback online. You get a lot of abuse, and that's because people don't like the truth. At GoodwinMJ is where you'll find Matt Goodwin online, and his book is out now. So it's got Britain talking. Values, Voice and Virtue, The New British Politics. Thanks, Matthew. See you soon. I'll be dealing with Gillian Keegan, the woke Education Secretary, at 10 o'clock. She's drafting legislation which will allow children to change their gender at school. Welcome to hell. That's at 10 o'clock in my Take at 10. You won't want to miss it. But coming up next with the pundits is the NHS losing the war against obesity. Should children be banned from weddings? And is there anything wrong with sunbathing naked in your back garden? I'll be revealing the results of our text poll as well on Brexit. We asked you earlier today in an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's poll, 7 years on from the votes and with the Eurozone in recession, have Remainers been proved wrong about Brexit? I'll bring you the results of that next.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to the show. Folks, I'll get to your emails very shortly, but reacting to the big stories of the day, my top pundits. Former MEP and political commentator Annunziata Rees-Mogg, leader of UKIP Neil Hamilton, and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Now, the war on obesity is one that the NHS seems to be losing. Errors in their online service meant overweight people were being told to eat more calories per day than they should have. This blunder means a person would eat enough excess calories to put on an extra 2.5 stone every year. The NHS also seems to have admitted defeat by starting to jab people with a weight loss injection instead of getting to the root of the problem. So is our NHS losing the war on obesity? Annunziata?
Yes. I think it's a broader issue than just a medical one. I think we have an attitude to food in this country generally that causes problems. But the fundamental point that the NHS is giving bad advice, I think, is true. In my own personal experience, I tested borderline for a gestational diabetes, so I had to go on a course of what to eat. And the advice was terrible. It was to eat lots and lots of ultra-processed food.
Carbohydrates, bread, pasta, that kind of thing? Grains?
Those were somewhat limited, but all the sugar-free, very processed food was highly recommended. I was told that no one over the age of 2 should have whole milk, which is actually proved to lower weight if you have full-fat milk rather than semi-skimmed. The advice is out of date, and the NHS has got to catch up.
Well, yes, and here's the issue, and even Labour have hinted at this, Nigel, haven't they, that the NHS can no longer be the sacred cow, particularly when it comes to funding. But even the public are starting to think that money's not the issue now. It's about the fact that the service has become the National Sickness Service, particularly in relation to lifestyle-related conditions like obesity.
Yeah, and so one of the things that Labour is talking about is prevention rather than...
Which is very good, yeah.
Rather than having to treat it. And certainly sort of things like obesity, cancer, mental health, addiction, these are all things that the NHS needs to step up to the plate for. Obesity is costing the NHS $6 billion. If you caught people earlier, you would actually save money. And they're doing that now on the screening, the new screening system for people who smoke to try and catch cancers earlier before they become more expensive. Well, the same thing should happen with obesity.
Absolutely. Neil, has Christine stopped you having cake?
Oh, I'm completely under the thumb in every possible respect, of course. No, we certainly don't have cake or anything of that kind. No, we lead a very healthy and frugal lifestyle, as you can see from my trim figure.
Definitely.
But what amazes me whenever I go into hospital, which mercifully isn't very often, is how many overweight people you see on the staff. And so if the NHS was really serious about the obesity problem, they would issue rules and guidelines for their own staff. It's not rocket science how to eat in a healthy way. We eat lots of fresh food, which we grow a lot ourselves in the garden at this time of year. And you don't have to eat lots of pastry and biscuits and so on and so forth, or crisps and other highly processed nibbles. So it's just a case of eating moderately and letting drink do the rest.
Well, definitely. Listen, I'm no expert, let me tell you, but I cut the carbs. I read what was it, the Fast 800 book by Michael Mosley, and that involves getting your carbohydrates down, recommended by Dr. David Unwin, NHS GP. It worked for me, but look, it's all about opinions, isn't it? If you're struggling with your weight, do reach out to your GP. Now, weddings are a time where two families usually come together to celebrate love. However, A particular bride kicked out her husband's entire family for violating her rules. Her rules were not to wear white and keep the wedding child-free, and they broke both of them. The family argued having kids at a wedding is a tradition. So what do we think? Should kids be banned from weddings, Annunziata?
Well,
you've got a few.
I've got a few kids, but I think fundamentally it's your wedding, it's your guest list. Invite who you want, don't invite who you don't want. In my personal view, children make weddings. Seeing little bridesmaids running around with flowers in their hair must be one of the most heartwarming sights possible. Dancing with Granny on the dance floor. It's beautiful, as far as I'm concerned. But the bride and groom tend to pay for their weddings. They're very expensive things. It's got to be up to them.
I think this particular bride is a misery guts because, as you say, kids make the atmosphere. And also, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, the wedding is about creating more children, isn't it?
Indeed. And also, it's a celebration...
Nigel remembers his wedding night.
It's a celebration of life and the future. And children are the future, as this terrible song goes. But...
I thought you were about to break into song there.
I would not scare the listeners and viewers that badly, no.
Tonight's Mark Dolan's night is a music-free zone. No one's going to break out into song, let me tell you. Now, on the off chance that it's not raining in the UK, people grab their swimsuits and head straight out to sunbathe. But in some cases, people leave their swimming suits behind. One woman has said online that she prefers to sunbathe naked on her trampoline, enjoying the rays kissing her skin. This could give Love Thy Neighbour a whole new meaning if they see them in your garden. So is there anything wrong with sunbathing naked in your backyard? Nigel?
Yes, there is. I mean, I don't personally mind if the neighbours want to see my todger, but I do respect the fact that they probably don't. So on the basis of that, I think that better to actually cover up for the benefit of other people.
Yeah, what do you think?
Well,
Neil?
I think where nudity is concerned, I think less is more, don't you? Or is it the other way around? But I think I'm with Annunziata's brother Jacob, because I've got a three-piece bathing costume that's made of tweed. So there's no danger of any of my naughty bits being seen by anybody else.
Although it raises a question about, you know, an Englishman's home is his castle. That garden is your territory. You should be able to do what you like in it,
but not if you can see over the top of your fence. I mean,
Why? Listen, can I just say something, right? Well, you're one of the country's best political journalists. Why do you hide your light under a bushel? OK, because I think there's an Adonis underneath that suit that you're wearing tonight.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say I'm proud.
And I think you're depriving a lot of housewives of afternoon pleasure.
But I'm not ashamed of what I've got. But I still don't think that other people want to see it.
Annunziata, here's the wider point. Us Brits, we're not that comfortable with nudity at all, are we? I remember first holidays in the 80s in Spain and seeing a topless lady on the beach. Couldn't believe my eyes.
Right, I can't speak for all Brits, but I can probably speak for quite a few Rees-Moggs. And no, we're definitely not very comfortable in public displays of lots of flesh. And I dread to think what might burn.
OK, well, folks, let me ask you... Strong image there, which I can't unsee. Would you like...
All processing that.
Would you like to see our chief political commentator, Nigel Nelson, in the buff? Let me know. Mark at gbnews.com. What we could do, if you want, you can send in some artist impressions of what he might look like without his clothes on. But let me tell you... Nervous laughter over there on camera too.
Yeah, you bet.
We have actually... we conducted, because we like to have a bit of fun on this show, we conducted a survey with the British public, and we've been asking you throughout the day, is there anything wrong with nude sunbathing in your garden? We will bring you the results of that text poll after this. Plus, my Mark Meets guest is a Pan Am 73 flight hostage survivor, Mike Threkston. He shares with me the incredible story of how he survived, and you won't want to miss it. See you in 3.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Da-da-da-da-dum, etc.
That's the whole point. But bomb.
And action.
Sergeant Green, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel. So many emails coming in, I'll get to them very shortly, but we'll start with this. Yes, it's time for Mark Meets and a truly extraordinary real-life story. Mike Thexton was returning to the UK from a month-long mountaineering trek when his Pan Am 73 plane was taken over by terrorists in Karachi in 1986. 21 people died and more than 100 people were badly injured. So why was Mike spared? The answer is revealed in a stunning new documentary called Hijacked, Flight 73, which is currently airing on the excellent Sky Documentaries channel. And Mike joins me now. Mike, tell me about that flight. What was the nature of your trip in the first place?
Well, I went out to join a bunch of people who were aiming to climb one of the mountains that my brother had climbed 3 years earlier. On his last expedition, my brother died up a mountain in northern Pakistan in 1983, died of altitude sickness. And I had wanted to go and see the place. Now, I'm not a mountaineer at all. So when some other people from his medical school, where he trained as a doctor, said that they were going to go to the place, I went along, did what I regarded was an incredibly difficult walk in, walk out, got back to the edge of civilization in Pakistan and was very keen to come home. And so I booked myself a different flight from everybody else, and it turned out to be this one. So I left everybody behind, went and caught this plane, and got myself hijacked.
Indeed. When did you first realise there was a problem on that flight? Because you're on the runway and you're expecting to take off. There's a commotion. What happened next?
We just got on the plane. I'd actually pushed the boat out and bought a business class ticket for very much the first time in my life because it was the only ticket available. And I'd gone up the front steps, been directed back to my seat. Doors were still open, passengers still coming in. I put my hand luggage on my seat, and then there was noise in the second doorway where the economy class passengers were coming in. There was a man struggling with a flight attendant, and then there was a shout from behind me where I'd just come in, and then there was a man in uniform with a rifle. I thought he was a proper soldier who'd come to deal with whatever the problem was in the second doorway, but actually he was then saying, "This is a hijack, everybody put your hands up." And then it began.
Indeed. Now, Mike, I understand the hijacking did not go according to plan. What was the original intention of the terrorists? What were they planning to do?
Well, we didn't find that out for many years. What happened was that the pilots escaped right at the very beginning of the hijack. They had the hijackers were not that bright. They didn't realise that the pilot sits upstairs on a jumbo jet, and so they had a little moment of confusion where they didn't know where to go to take over the plane. So the pilots escaped, so we were stuck on the ground. Now they said they wanted another crew to fly the plane to Cyprus to negotiate for the release of some other terrorists who were held in prison in Cyprus. Actually, what they've said more recently is that they wanted to do a 9/11. They wanted to fly the plane over Israel and fly it into some military target in Israel. So obviously they couldn't say that. They certainly wouldn't get another crew. But that was apparently what they intended to do. It was a suicide mission with all of us taken along for the ride.
Truly chilling. How did you get chosen as one of the hostages for the terrorists to negotiate over?
Well, they picked somebody out at random and negotiated, and then shot him and threw him out. And then they decided they wanted an American, so they got one of the flight attendants to collect in passports. With incredible bravery and ingenuity, she decided not to give him any white Americans. She realised that they would be in real trouble. All the cabin crew were Indian, so he wasn't managing to find the enemy very easily. So she collected little passports. She got rid of all the American passports with white faces, Anglo-Saxon names, presented this pile to him. He realised that all of the Americans appeared to be Indian and Pakistani in origin, so he decided to choose a British passport, which happened to be mine. So they announced, "Would Mr. Michael John Thexton please come to the front of the plane?" And I had to go up there and wait for them to decide to shoot me.
Extraordinarily, you had the opportunity, Mike, of later speaking to one of the men jailed for this hijacking, a man who might have killed you. Did you find out why you were spared, why they didn't shoot you?
Yes, this was arranged as part of this documentary, and I thought long and hard before agreeing to do it. But I realised that even after all these years, it's not far off 40 years ago, there were things that I wanted to ask him. And at the end of the hijack, they put me back with the rest. I'd been up the front 12 hours waiting for them to make a demand that would not be met, and then they would shoot me. And so I said, "Why did you put me back with the others?" And he said, "Oh, it was because of what you said about your brother having died in the mountains." And I had said this when I was very first called forward 12 hours earlier. I had said, "Please don't hurt me. My brother died in the mountains. My parents have no one else." And I didn't think he was listening. I didn't think that he would remember that 12 hours later. I didn't think he would remember that 36 years later. But that seems to be it, that I made myself in some way human to him, and he decided he couldn't kill me. I mean, didn't stop him opening fire at random into the body of the passengers, but he put me in with the others to take my chance.
In a sense, your dear late brother saved your life, Mike.
Yes, I mean, it's sort of nice to think of it that way. It's a sort of Hollywood ending, I suppose. But maybe he is somewhere having a good chuckle about that.
Mike, how has the fear of death shaped the rest of your life since that attack?
Well, I guess the main thing is it gives me a very well-defined sense of proportion. There are things that matter and there are things that don't really matter. And although I can get annoyed with things that don't really matter, it doesn't take long for me to just remind myself that I didn't expect to be here. That's a good thing to carry around with you.
Mike, I'm so glad you're in one piece and we were able to have this conversation. Let me tell you, the documentary is called Hijacked Flight 73, which is currently available on the Sky Documentaries channel. Well worth a watch. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
Remarkable. What a story. Coming up next in My Take at 10, why are Tories drawing up plans to let children change their sex at school? Who's going to save our children from this dangerous path? Let me tell you, folks, that we've got your emails coming in thick and fast, and it's very busy on the email. I wish I'd had more time earlier. A few complaints about my panellist, Nigel Nelson, and his remarks about the culture wars. Hi, Mark, says Alan. Nigel Nelson, who thinks that women can have a willy. Sorry, I can't take this guy seriously on anything. Let's have a look, a couple of other emails before we get to the break. Mark at gbnews.com. Nude sunbathing. Your panel amazed me, says Victor. Get real. 14% of the population admit going naked, and there are more than that. It's your garden. You were born naked. That's a natural state, and that's how it should be. Thanks. Keep those emails coming. I'll be dealing with the woke Education Secretary next.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my take at 10, why are Tories drawing up plans to let children change their sex at school? Who's going to save our kids from this dangerous path? And 7 years on from Brexit, with the fastest growth in the G7 over the last 2 years, record trade with the EU, and with Britain avoiding recession unlike the Eurozone, have Remainers been proved wrong? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, political legend Anne Widdecombe. And Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of the papers, with tomorrow's front pages from exactly 10:30 sharp. So I'll be dealing with the woke Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, in a couple of minutes' time. She wants kids to be able to transition, change their gender at school. What's wrong with learning mathematics? I'll see you in 2 minutes after the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Good evening to you. 1 minute past 10. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The United States believes yesterday's armed rebellion will weaken Vladimir Putin's government and the Russian war effort. The leader of the Wagner Group, Evgeny Prigozhin, will be exiled to Belarus and stripped of control of the mercenary fighters after his short-lived mutiny ended last night. But US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the unprecedented challenge to Putin's leadership has exposed fresh cracks that may take months to play out, but it could aid Ukraine's counter-offensive against Russian forces.
To the extent this presents a distraction, a loss of focus for the Russians, that may help the Ukrainians on the battlefield. Exactly where this goes, we don't know. But what we do know is that we've seen real cracks emerge. Again, a direct challenge to Putin's authority.
And while the immediate risk to Putin appears to have been contained, emergency security measures remain in place in Moscow, as Russian journalist Alexei Weir told GB News earlier.
Everything has been resolved. It seems that the catastrophe has been avoided. We still do have some extra law enforcement here on the streets, and they are wearing some heavy gear, for example, bulletproof vests and helmets. They have machine guns, which is unusual. But as you can see here, life continues. The situation here in downtown Moscow doesn't seem any different from the usual. The Red Square is still closed, but other than that, everything seems fine.
Authorities investigating the deaths of 5 people in the Titan submersible implosion say they're hoping the tragedy will lead to tighter regulation of the industry. These are some live pictures of St John's Harbour in Newfoundland, where the inquiry is taking place on the Polar Prince. That's the ship that launched the Titan. Now, those who were on board when contact was lost with the sub are being interviewed. Teams from Canada and the US are investigating the matter.
Certainly that is one of the goals of the MBI. That's an opportunity to learn from the incident and then work with our international partners worldwide to do exactly what you mentioned. Improve regulations or international safety standards. The salvage operations are ongoing. I'm not going to give the details of what the recovery has been to date, but the resources are on site and capable of recovering the debris.
The Duchess of York is recuperating following a successful operation to treat breast cancer. Sarah Ferguson was recently diagnosed with an early form of the disease after a routine mammogram, having been symptom-free. She was released from hospital earlier and is now recovering with her family in Windsor. TV online, DAB and TuneIn Radio, this is GB News. Now it is back to Mark.
My thanks to the brilliant Aaron Armstrong, who's back in an hour's time. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. 7 years on from Brexit, with the fastest growth in the G7 over that last 2-year period, record trade with the EU, and with Britain avoiding recession unlike the Eurozone, have Remainers been proved wrong? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, politics legend Anne Widdecombe. Plus, we got the papers at 10:30 sharp with full pundit reaction. And my pundits will be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros. Big stories, big guests, and always big opinions. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. Let's start with my take at 10. The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan's plan to be the new Margaret Thatcher and win the hearts of the Tory right lasted about 11 minutes. After it was revealed, she plans to allow pupils to choose their own pronouns and change gender at school if parents give their consent. She's obviously already relinquished any future leadership ambitions. Tory backbenchers will hate this. Go woke, no vote. How can this government, barely recognisable as Conservative these days, consider a plan in which teachers now have to ask pupils whether they're a boy or a girl that day? It's confusing and potentially damaging to those children involved, who may come to regret this later in life. And it's disruptive to the other kids who controversially don't think they were born in the wrong body. Now, I take the point about parental consent, and that is an important step. Children unilaterally changing their gender without mum and dad knowing is truly abhorrent. But I don't see this as much of a solution. It will be meat and drink to teachers like that nut job at an East Sussex school who called 2 pupils a disgrace for questioning whether one of the girls should be allowed to call herself a cat. Let me give you a sense of how mad this is going. The Telegraph report that some secondary schools in England have agreed to affirm children's demands to be recognised not just as cats, but also horses and, wait for it, dinosaurs. That's right, little Jimmy isn't a boy anymore. He's a triceratops, folks. Who needs Jurassic Park when you've got your local comprehensive? If an adult chooses to identify by a different gender, good luck to them. As a courtesy, I would always respect a grown adult's pronouns or choice of name. It's a free country. I've got close friends who have been on that important and joyous journey. But I've got 2 red lines. First of all, women's hard-won sex-based rights. The integrity of female sport, female-only changing rooms, female-only prisons and female-only rape crisis centres, if that's not too much to ask. And my other red line is children, who can so easily be caught up in the latest fashion craze, which I believe at the moment is transgenderism. It's been reported that cases of anorexia among teenage girls are in decline. Great news, but only to be replaced by the toxic myth that somehow you're in the wrong body or even the wrong species. One social contagion replaced by another. Both are rooted in the belief that if you change your body, somehow you'll be able to love yourself. As the top author Lionel Shriver puts it, both diagnoses have significant intersections with autism, anxiety and depression, making patients susceptible to a tangible-seeming solution to a generalised discontent. Both populations mistake self-annihilation for a route to enlightenment and rebirth. So why does all of this matter? Well, because if you're an adult and you transition, that's a wonderful thing. But if it's who you are, of course you go for it. Children are different. Children are impressionable. They're vulnerable to brainwashing and grooming. And it's just too early for a child to make a decision like that, particularly given that if schools became an environment where you can change your gender, let me tell you that medieval chest-flattening devices to stop your breasts growing, puberty blockers to stop you becoming a reproductive adult, and the butchery of removing sex organs will inevitably follow. This new policy would allow schools to be the breeding ground for interventions that a whole generation of children may come to regret. I think it's bloody simple. You wait till you're 18. Currently, 1,000 parents are considering suing the NHS Tavistock Centre for irreversible damage to their children. And I suspect that's the tip of the iceberg. And let's not forget the travesty of children and young people who are so-called gender non-conforming, in other words, being a camp boy or a tomboy girl, who would likely go on to be gay or lesbian. They are instead, under the rules of this crazy new religion, being placed on a path to change their sex. This is why so many gay people and so many women reject the new pride flag, because it represents not just deep misogyny with the erasing of women, but homophobia too, with a message to lesbians, for example, that if you aren't attracted to a fully intact biological male who calls himself female, you're a bigot. What a time to be alive. Under these latest plans, schools will be an incubator for this crazy ideology, and we, the taxpayers, will be paying for it. Now, as I've said before, the case for homeschooling grows stronger by the day. In the end, schools should be politics-free and a safe space for children to be just that, children. The bottom line is they shouldn't be asked what sex they are today or tomorrow, or if they're rabbits or a dinosaur or a hedgehog or something. They are there at school to learn reading, writing and arithmetic, not that they may be one of 100 genders. Is it too much to ask that we let kids be kids? It's time to end the war on gender, and it starts in the classroom. Your reaction, mark at gbnews.com. Let's get the views now of my top pundits tonight. Former MEP and political commentator Annunziata Rees-Mogg, the leader of the UK Independence Party Neil Hamilton, and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Annunziata, you are a mother. How many kids do you have?
3, or should I say I've got a horse, a unicorn and a dinosaur?
Yeah, you might. Your reaction to this move by Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, to allow children to transition with parental consent in a school setting?
The parental consent is important. I don't take away from that. But Gillian Keegan seems to be on a bit of a mission to make it much easier for children under 18s to completely change their life and permanently. I think that's the really worrying thing, that not only is there the feminist point, which I find abhorrent, that, you know, we taught and fought for girls to be whatever they wanted to be. They could be firemen, they could be soldiers, they could wear trousers, revolutionary, not that long ago. Only now to tell them that if that's what they want to do, in fact, they're meant to be a boy. But also that all of this is undoable. Once you've made the decision to go down the puberty blocker route and then the operations route, there is no going back. We don't let children do that on anything else.
May I ask how you would react if one of your children came home and said, actually, Mummy, I'm not a little girl now, I'm a little boy, or I'm a hedgehog?
Well, I mean, I think my 3-year-old boy does want to be a dinosaur and half the time thinks he is, but he's not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to let him paint scales on him permanently. But I would want to talk to them. I would want to see what they were going through and why they were going through it. I think it's so important to try and understand what it is that's going on in their head. That is it, like anorexia, that it's a form of self-loathing, that you aren't comfortable with what you are, so you want to be something else, and something else seems better, that the grass is always greener? Or is it a really deep, long-term feeling, in which case you can change when you're 18? But I think we don't want to jump ahead of ourselves and make decisions for children too young to make up their minds for the rest of their lives and force them down a route where they cannot do a U-turn and go back.
It's an interesting story, this, Nigel, isn't it? Because this is blue on blue in terms of the Tories, rather divided on this issue. Gillian Keegan is the Education Secretary, but the likes of Miriam Cates, a respected Tory MP, not happy at all with this move.
No, it's dividing the Tory party in the same way it's dividing the country. The one good thing I think that is happening is that there'll be proper government guidance for teachers about what should actually happen. And you've got to bear in mind that this is already happening in schools. Take away the cats and the dinosaurs, because you can't change a species, and teachers should actually make that clear to children. But when it comes down to kids being transgender, it's already happening. And from what I can gather from both teachers and from children, is that most of them don't bat an eyelid about it. They find this perfectly acceptable, and there may be some arrangements have to be made for changing rooms, that kind of thing. But beyond that, the kids themselves are perfectly happy with this going on. And the important thing is to follow NHS advice, which is to treat the whole thing with extreme caution. So what you're doing is not permanent. You're starting with talking therapy. You might move on to puberty blockers. Maybe after that, it would be opposition sex hormones. But surgery is a long way down the line.
Well, I think puberty blockers is where you lost me, Nigel. But your reaction and the position of UKIP on this, Neil Hamilton, Hamilton.
Well, UKIP actually had the first transgender member of the European Parliament elected in 2010, so we do have some form in this matter. But Nigel's just said that, this is an issue which divides the country. But, I mean, that's just absolute nonsense. The number of people who are faced with problems of gender dysphoria is vanishingly small, and the overwhelming majority of people of this country simply can't understand how this argument can have achieved the prominence that it has, and how common sense seems to have gone out of the window, and how it is that somebody can be an education minister in a Conservative government and could put forward such a plainly ridiculous argument for children who are not fully formed emotionally and still have a lot of learning to do, and going through adolescence and puberty, as I'm sure we can all remember, poses problems from time to time. And yes, of course, parents need to be loving and understanding of what's going through their children's minds, but it's not for teachers and schools, in my opinion, to impose certain norms of wokery upon the vast majority of people who don't want it.
The Tories in the grip of a woke civil war. Your reaction? What do you think about kids changing gender at school as long as mum and dad don't mind? Or dad and dad, or mum and mum, who knows? Dinosaur and dinosaur. Mark at gbnews.com. At 10:30, we've got the papers at 10:30 sharp with full pundit reaction. But next, 7 years on from Brexit, have Remainers been proved wrong? I've got the statistics that suggests exactly that. We'll react with Anne Widdecombe. See you in 2.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Conservatives' education minister wants to allow children to transition at school as long as mum and dad don't mind. Ed says Mark Gillian needs to transition to another party. ASAP. Lisa says if Gillian Keegan is really going to go up this deluded path, she needs sacking. Audrey says, hey, teacher, leave our kids alone. Gender agenda in schools is totally abhorrent and dangerous. School is a place of learning, full stop, not sex orientation. Hi, Mark, says Mark. Our second daughter is homeschooled for the last 3 years. Best thing we ever did. Thanks for being honest and trying to wake people up. Keep up the good work. Well, look, drop me a note if you disagree with what I have said and if you take the view that Keegan is doing the right thing. Mark at gbnews.com. It's time now for the Newsmaker, in which we speak to a fearless commentator on the big stories of the day. And tonight, following a flurry of trade deals with fast-growing economies around the world, with the UK avoiding recession as the Eurozone and Germany are plunged into one, with exports to the EU at a record high, and with London's position as the European, if not world, financial capital uncontested, and with the UK outpacing countries like France and Germany for inward investment, have Remainers been proved categorically wrong about Brexit? Let's get the views of tonight's Newsmaker, former government minister, best-selling author and television personality Anne Widdecombe. And I know Brexit's not perfect, but it hasn't been the calamity that was predicted.
Oh, it was never going to be the calamity that was predicted. I mean, the Remainers had what they called, or we called at any rate, Project Fear, which was deliberately to alarm people to suggest that it couldn't work. And then ever since we've had Brexit, you know, if it rains, people blame Brexit. And gradually that narrative is taking hold and it needs to be repulsed. I mean, you've named some things, but when you look at one of those deals that you mentioned, the Trans-Pacific Alliance, I mean, for heaven's sake, that's worth 15% of the global economy. Now, that's big stuff. And as that progresses, we're really going to see a massive difference. We haven't, of course, had to pay the sub to the EU. We have put even more than what we were paying annually into the NHS. So when we're told by the Remain faction that we lied, we did not. And of course, nobody needs convincing that we were way ahead of the curve on the vaccines delivery. And indeed, the EU quite deliberately tried to frustrate us, even at one point trying to close the Irish border without even asking the Taoiseach. And so I think we can see fairly clearly that we've benefited from Brexit. But, and this is a big but, Mark, I know you think that, you know, we all want a perfect Brexit. There's no such thing as a perfect anything. But there is so much we could do with Brexit, could have already done, still could do, if we took full advantage of it and dared to diverge from Europe rather than converge.
Well, indeed. We know that Rishi Sunak, although a Brexiteer, doesn't seem to be particularly red-blooded in that department. He seems a little cool on Brexit, but not as cool as Keir Starmer would be. What would happen to Brexit and our relationship with Brussels in the event of a Labour government, Anne? Well, first of all, Keir Starmer has said that he wants to renegotiate with Europe, not with a view to full re-entry, that's cloud cuckoo land, quite honestly, but with a view to closer convergence, closer alignment, working with them, accepting their law, etc. Now, he has said that. So, you know, when the Brexiteers oppose that and people say, oh, you know, get over Brexit, it's past history, we say, hang on, you get a Labour government, you're going to get another renegotiation. We're going to have Brexit all over, all the arguments over Brexit again. And yes, I mean, you're quite right. It would be a horrible proposition. But we are not going to re-enter. I mean, that is serious cloud cuckoo territory. We'd have to join the euro. We'd have to pay an enormous entrance fee. It would be back to being a net contributor and putting in more than we take out. I don't believe the country wants to go through that all over again. But having come out in name rather than in fact, we can make it a lot more fact. The problem is the unholy mess that successive Conservative prime ministers made of Northern Ireland. And we're still bound by an awful lot of EU law because Northern Ireland is still effectively in the single market. And it was never necessary to do it that way. That is something which we're going to have to face up to. You know, we like to think, well, you know, it's okay, it'll all go quiet and we'll get used to it. No,
we're going to have to face up to that. Already the DUP won't power share.
That is a real worry, and of course that was a red line for me to see government back in Northern Ireland. And what about those Remainers, though? The likes of Michael Heseltine, your former colleague in the Conservative Party, Alistair Campbell, borderline war criminal, bleating about Brexit, blaming everything for Brexit. Will these Remainers ever concede defeat?
Probably not for a long time. Eventually, defeat will just become a fact of life, and they're going to have to accept it, but not for a long time. But interestingly, I was at a dinner over the weekend, which was being addressed by Michael Heseltine, in which, although it wasn't remotely relevant, indeed was probably against the conventions, he ended up with a peroration about how we would one day have to rejoin the EU. I was sitting next to somebody who voted Remain, who served in the European Parliament, who's always been a Remainer. And he said to me that once the decision was taken, he became a Brexiteer. And because of what's gone on ever since, he is now, his words, a rampant Brexiteer. And I just roared with laughter and said, "You're joking." And he said, "No, I'm not."
It's the zeal of the converted, Anne Widdecombe. Wonderful to have you back on the show. It's always the highlight of the week, our encounters, and we'll see you in a week's time. Have a great week, Anne.
Thank you, and you, and you.
Anne Widdecombe there, former government minister, best-selling author, television personality, and supporter of Reform UK, led by Richard Tice. Anne has left the Conservative Party because she doesn't think that they've done a good job with Brexit. What is your view? Mark at gbnews.com. I think we've got the results of our text poll. We've been asking you in an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll whether or not, 7 years on from the vote, and with the Eurozone in recession, have Remainers been proved wrong about Brexit? Yes, say 65.6%. No, say 34.4%. There you go. Another win for the Brexiteers. And I say that as a Remainer. Who knew? What's my story? The British people voted to leave. I accepted the result, and I believe it will be a roaring success. But what's your view? Mark at gbnews.com. We've got the papers next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant Reed, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let me just talk briefly about the show, our show, yours and mine. First of all, last night we enjoyed the highest ratings on a Saturday night since the beginning of GB News. Why did that happen? Because of you. Your support on the radio, on TV, people watching online, we've got the app. I just want to thank you. I get so many emails. It's the best job I've ever had, and it would be nothing without you. So if you're enjoying the show and if you're enjoying the channel, tell your friends, tell your family, and let's change the world together. I've got to tell you that. The couple of other things I should tell you is that the show now starts on a Friday at 9. So we're 9 till 11, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Nice and easy, nice and simple. And it's great to have your company. Now, let's get to the emails. Always the best bit of the show. mark@gbnews.com. And let's talk about a couple of things here. This, first of all, in relation to Gillian Keegan. Now, she is the Education Secretary. She wants children to be able to transition at school as long as mum and dad don't mind. Well, you are not happy about this, although Sheila wants to say, Mark, I do not believe for 1 minute that the Prime Minister will allow the Education Secretary to do what she's saying. And you know that, says Sheila. He is of Indian heritage, totally against his beliefs. She will probably be thrown out. Just another witch hunt against the Tories. Shame on you, says Sheila. Sheila, thank you for sharing your strong views. This programme is all about opinions. How about this from Alexandra? And this is in regards to my big opinion monologue. Does Britain live beyond its means? And Alexander says, Mark, if we cut benefits, get people off their fat backsides and make them work rather than let them lay about all day, we might make some progress. Look, I'll get to more of your emails shortly. mark@gbnews.com. But first this. We have tomorrow's front pages, as always on a Sunday. It's at 10:30. And let's start with The Guardian, and they lead with the following. Wagner uprising reveals cracks in Putin's authority, says US. Queen was asked to veto Lebedev peerage. Government officials asked if the late Queen would block Evgeny Lebedev, who is a top media magnate, a peerage because of concerns he could be a national security risk over his father's links to Putin's regime. Independent, PM accused of dirty tricks to win votes in an ugly culture war. A Labour frontbencher has triggered a furious row after he accused Rishi Sunak of weaponising trans issues in a cynical attempt to win votes. Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, said the Prime Minister was unfairly using equality arguments in a culture war. But a senior Tory hit back and said that Mr Sunak was simply trying to ensure the protection of children. Last week, leaked footage showed the PM making transphobic jokes and Number 10 wading into a bizarre row about identity politics in schools. The Iron newspaper, Putin silent on mutiny that rocked the Kremlin. Reasons to be cheerful, say the metro.co.uk. Wagner coup, forces take out 39 Russian aircrew. Ukraine says it's making progress in all directions. And 32-degree RSPCA snake alert, says the Daily Star. Some like it hot. Yes, indeed. Let me tell you that feeling hot, 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 say the Star. Fiery heat waves are on the way, with concerns about wildlife, including some of our snakes. Those are your front pages. Let's get a full pundit reaction now from former MEP and political commentator Annunziata Rees-Mogg, the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Lots of stories to sink our teeth into. Let's start, shall we, Nigel Nelson, with Putin silent on mutiny that rocked the Kremlin. Dare we dream that both the war and his tenure in the Kremlin is coming to an end?
We can dream. I'm not sure it is.
Beginning of the end rather than the end of the beginning?
Well, I'm not sure it's going to be even that. But I mean, as things were progressing yesterday, and it was pretty fast moving, it looked like that Putin might be toppled, but not by the Wagner Group. So we're now in an even more complicated situation the day after, whereby they've gone off to Belarus. Putin has dropped charges against everybody, and I think that his authority has been damaged by this, but it's far too early to say that this will be pushing him out.
What do you think? I mean, the optics of this aren't great for Putin, are they, Neil?
No, because he's the great Russian strongman who liked to pose as having the overwhelming support of the entire Russian people. And indeed, opinion polls in Russia show that he gets about 80% approval, which is the sort of level of support that British politicians could only dream of. But he's an authoritarian, it's a gangster regime, it's a fallout amongst thieves, basically. And Putin comes out of it as the leader of the moderate faction, because Mr. Prigozhin is not as nice as he looks, is he? He's a real brutal monster of a man for whom human life matters not at all, except to feather his nest and achieve his authoritarian, brutal objectives. So I think it is a crack in the Russian political system. Putin is 70. And I think maybe he's been silent because he's had so much Botox he can't move his mouth.
Well, it could be. I mean, he'd have that in common with a few other famous people, but not normally politicians. Annunziata, this is important for my viewers and listeners because this war is causing energy prices to be so high. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, so the cost of grain has gone up, vegetable oil. It's really, really hurting Brits as well. This war needs to end.
It does, but I think we need to be really careful about what we wish for. That Putin is an undoubtedly terrible man who is happy to do very awful things. But this is the devil in the deep blue sea, that when marching up towards Moscow merely yesterday, Prigozhin was reportedly taking nuclear weapons factories. And I think we've got to be very, very careful that Russian politics is a murky business, the nicest way to put it, and any of these people are more than capable of making even worse decisions.
Most certainly. In the Independent Annunziata, PM accused of dirty tricks to win votes in ugly culture war. Labour frontbencher, a guy who I do think is a talented politician, Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has triggered a furious row as he claims the leaked video of Sunak making transphobic jokes shows he's using the LGBTQ plus equality issue as a wedge issue, that he's going to try to win votes from this. What do you think?
Well, I hope that those of us who think that women are women and should have the rights of being a woman are not pawns in this, but have our voices listened to. And clearly Labour are not going to listen to a single word we have to say. The phobia label is thrown around left, right and centre. But I know that this video was played on GB News last week. Yeah. And it was a light-hearted joke about going back to the classroom to learn biology. It wasn't an attack on trans people. And I think we've got to be very careful about the level of rhetoric this is getting to. That with the likes of J.K. Rowling demonised and the word TERF, which does include phobic, being thrown around left, right and centre, I think it's very worrying what direction we're going in. And I'm glad that Rishi Sunak is listening to the majority of this country who do have the common sense to understand a bit of biology.
With J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, receiving death threats for simply stating there are two biological sexes, which is now controversial. We know that the Tories are down and out in the polls, but is there a glimmer of hope for them at the next election if they seize this issue, the public discontent with wokeism?
There is undoubtedly, and certainly in Lincolnshire, I hear a lot of discontent with the level of woke going on, and which is always blamed on the big metro centres. But there are so many problems in this country, and I really don't think that any one issue is going to be the game changer for who wins the next election. But I think we should really tone down the rhetoric so we can listen to common sense, listen to the children who are in this emotional turmoil, and make sure that bad decisions aren't made that affect everyone's futures.
Well, yes, Nigel, do you think that Rishi Sunak can rescue his career and his premiership, possibly win power for another 5 years, if he goes to the public on the anti-woke ticket?
No.
That will work?
No, it won't. You were talking to Matthew Goodman about it a bit earlier on. The important thing at the moment, the big thing that people care about is cost of living. So he's got to make inflation his absolute priority. Next on the list would be the NHS, so he's got to get waiting lists down as he promised. The stopping the boats business, that won't happen. He's not going to stop all the boats. It was a rather stupid promise to make. But culture wars is very low down on the list of voters' concerns. So,
is it though?
Well, we talk about it a lot, but people care about more important things.
Don't they care about both? And aren't they sick of political correctness? Aren't they sick of, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory being rewritten, or comedians being cancelled simply for making an off-colour joke?
All those things, but they're still far more concerned about how they're going to pay the mortgage, how they're going to afford food on the table. Those are the core political issues. So if the Tories choose to go down this route and think, oh, this is an election winner, you might win a few people over, but it ain't going to win the election.
Neil, as per my big opinion, I do agree with Nigel. I said that it's time now for an all-out war on inflation. It is the economy, stupid. That's got to be number one. My viewers and listeners are struggling. It's a nightmare for many. But I think this runs concurrent. A lot of people are mystified at Keir Starmer's position on the status of women, particularly the fact that he doesn't think that all women don't have a penis.
Well, of course, he's a prisoner of his own party and its obsessions, which they've had now for many decades, increasingly so in more bizarre issues like the way this trans debate has developed. Who would have thought we would ever be talking about children self-identifying as cats or dinosaurs or whatever? And that's been a serious proposition which has been put forward by some of these extremists in the last week. But as far as the general public is concerned, this is all utter nonsense, of course. I do agree with Nigel. I don't think this is going to be a central issue in any election campaign. Bread and butter issues always are going to matter more, especially when we are going to go through a period of great economic difficulty. Rishi Sunak is the victim of the torpor which has afflicted the Tory party since 2019 and probably long preceded that, where they've made promises or given the impression of making promises on things like running the economy or immigration or getting government debt down or you name it, and have not been in a position to deliver on any of them. And the most fundamental, of course, is Brexit, a great opportunity which is utterly squandered by their inactivity on this. Quite mystifying, actually, because the Tory party in Parliament is now at loggerheads with the average Tory-thinking voter in the country. We've seen this before, of course. We had it under John Major. I lived through the horror of that Parliament, 1992 to 97, where John Major actually declared war on Eurosceptics in his party, a most foolish thing to do. And after the collapse of the ERM, for 5 years, the Tories having fallen off a cliff in the polls, they never moved. And so the inevitable cataclysm came in 1997. Well, I think we're in that position now. There is nothing the Tories can do in practice to increase their degree of popularity. If it happens, it'll be for reasons beyond their control.
I wonder about that. Events, dear boy, events.
And that's what I'm saying.
How far could the Tories get with a message that we're terrible, but Labour would be worse? The lesser of two evils strategy.
I think you do have to offer people hope. And the hope might be that we regain an understanding of our own society, and the war on woke is certainly part of that. But as both my fellow panellists have said, the biggest thing is the economy. It's being able to afford your household bills. It's being able to afford your mortgage. And I don't hold much hope that Rishi Sunak is going to reach his targets. And even if he did, halving inflation still means your price is going up by 4%.
I mean, Nigel, that argument that Labour would be worse, I think will be potent for the Tories at the next election. They'll probably have quite a humble campaign where they say, look, it's not been perfect, mistakes have been made, but we've got a good CEO in Rishi Sunak. and that Keir Starmer is your worst nightmare, do you think the public will have truck with that?
Well, no, I mean, the Tories are already doing it. They're arguing, yeah, we make mistakes, but imagine what it would be like under Labour.
Well, would Starmer get inflation down quicker than Sunak by yielding to the union barons with their inflation-busting pay demands?
Well, not necessarily by doing it that way. There are other ways of doing that.
Pray tell.
We were talking about that earlier, that I think he would still put interest rates up. He might get wages down on the basis of relaxing immigration rules, which would be a way of doing that. The important thing is that when the election comes, you've got two kind of managers who are facing each other. They are a bit like...
They're both a bit corporate, aren't they?
They are. So the result is, what it'll come down to is, who do you think is the most competent?
Who wins that battle?
It's an ugly contest, isn't it?
Why? Why does Rishi edge it?
Partly he, I think, is more ruthless.
Okay.
But partly he hasn't just U-turned at every possible opportunity. And talking about the economic policy, well, we have just seen Starmer give up on his environmental pledges because of the pressure on the economy, and we'll see more and more U-turns.
He would argue, of course, he's actually dedicated to sound economics.
Then he should have thought of it before he announced the policy. Not much has changed in between.
It looks like he'll be able to prove or disprove that in a year's time, unless, as Neil Hamilton says, something happens outside of everyone's control. Oh, anything that does happen, you'll find out on GB News and on Mark Dolan tonight. Next up, we've got more front pages, including the Mail and the Mirror, with some very interesting headlines, plus the Express as well. And my pundits will be nominating their headline heroes of the day and their back page zeros. Also, we've been running a poll. We've been asking you, 'cause you know the weather's great at the moment, is there anything wrong with sunbathing naked in your back garden? We've got the results of that next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, this show is all about your opinion. A terribly important burning issue of the day, sunbathing naked in the garden. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, we've been asking you in an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll. The results are in. Is there anything wrong with sunbathing naked in the garden? Yes, 28.8%, but no, say a very raunchy 71.2%. As Annunziata said earlier, it depends which bits get burnt. The best bits always. Let's have a look at some of the papers now. More papers coming in hot off the press. Daily Mail. Fergie in recovery after breast cancer op. That is the Duchess of York, who has returned home to Windsor with her ex-husband, Prince Andrew, following several days in hospital and successful surgery. So we wish her well. She's a really nice lady, and it's obviously been a tough time for her. And speedy recovery to Fergie, who I've always thought was a great character. Daily Mirror. Recovering at home, Fergie, my breast cancer op. Daily Express, Duchess's breast cancer operation is a success and Putin's days numbered as enemies circle. And The Times, consumer watchdogs ordered to bare teeth over rip-off costs on consumers. Prepare for fall of Putin, Britain told. And rail plan for discount tickets hits the buffers. Well, those are your front pages. Reacting to the big stories of the day, former MEP and political commentator Annunziata Rees-Mogg, leader of UKIP Neil Hamilton, and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. And now let's get to my pundits' nominations for headline heroes and back page zeros of the day. So who should we start with? Nigel, who's your headline hero? Who's smiling on you today?
The headline hero is the 13-year-old cat girl, on the basis that she sparked a much-needed national debate on just how far self-identity should go.
Has that debate been resolved, do you think?
No.
You'd cat's in hell's chance of that ever being sorted out. How about Annunziata? Who's your headline hero?
My headline hero are the two 13-year-old girls who recorded their teacher calling them despicable for not believing their friend was a cat. So I nominate two other 13-year-olds.
Yeah, we live in fear of our kids having a teacher like that, don't we?
It's just unbelievable. It's being so unwilling to have a discussion, but just to judge two children on views they held. And it is a view and an opinion. It is the teacher's views are not based in fact.
I also, like you say, I slightly resent the word view or opinion. I mean, this is biology. That's not really a view, is it? You know that expression, gender critical? Well, really, it's gender factual.
I think it can be most definitely an opinion that gender is different to sex.
OK.
And I think that's what the teacher was very bad
Isn't that a fact,
to argue.
Isn't that a fact? I mean, you have biological sex and you have gender. They are different things.
They have been used interchangeably for hundreds of years.
Which they shouldn't have been.
But, no, we've changed their definition.
I think you might be right, but I think the issue with trans ideology is going further and saying that it's bigotry to argue there are two biological sexes, that you can actually change your biological sex. That seems to be the new frontier. That,
well, you can't.
The trans lobby... Right, well, but you could get hate and abuse for saying that on television.
Well, I get hate and abuse for saying that you can change your gender, so it'd be nice to get some from the other side.
No one hates you. We love you, Nigel.
Thank you very much.
And I'm very happy that we splashed the cash and made a big money move to get you over from the Sunday Express. And,
Cover rise, please, as well.
Well, now you're talking. Let's have a look at your headline hero, the brilliant Neil Hamilton.
Well, I'm going to strike out in a different direction, and my headline hero is Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Leader of Wagner, the sort of renegade private army employed by Putin, who turned on him.
Exactly, and it's an accidental vote in a sense, because it's what he did and the effect this is likely to have eventually on the Russian regime. And although he didn't do what he did for reasons that I would regard as heroic, the flip side of that coin is that he could be the pebble which, when removed, ultimately causes the avalanche which will bring Putin and his cronies down.
Here's hoping. Well, from Yevgeny Prigozhin to our back page zero, and Nigel, speak of the devil.
Yes, it's Yevgeny Prigozhin. On the basis of why on earth did he go to all that trouble?
Yeah.
Didn't carry any of it out, disappeared off to Belarus. I just can't see the point of what he did.
So
All right,
incompetent that he should be in the government.
Do you take Neil's point, though, that it's drawn a little blood in the Kremlin?
I think it's done that, but I don't think it's got rid of Putin. That he didn't set out to depose Putin. It'll all depend now on the people surrounding Putin, what happens next.
Back page 0, yours, Annunciata, a suntanned Canadian. Tell me more.
Is Mark Carney, and
Laughter of derision from the pundits.
It's the nude sunbathing that we've been dealing with.
I don't want to see Mark Carney nude sunbathing or in the nude in any other respect, but I do think that it is ridiculous that he is blaming Brexit for the inflation crisis. He was in charge of Bank of England monetary policy for 7 years up until 2020. We saw inordinate amounts of quantitative easing in that time and absolutely no regard for the build-up that was creating for inflation and nothing done with interest rates. He should have been on the game himself. I think he's just like Prince Harry.
Yeah.
Blame anyone but yourself.
That's right. And you are the very thing they accuse you of being.
Absolutely.
And this is the guy with blood on his hands when it comes to inflation. Only a couple of seconds for you to have a go at Rishi Sunak, Neil. Why?
Well, because he has the nerve to tell people to hold their nerve during a crisis that he has been very largely responsible for creating, both as Chancellor of the Exchequer, during which the great QE quantitative easing splurge was exploding, and subsequently talking about such foolish things as caps on prices in supermarkets on basic items of food as a means of controlling inflation.
Political gimmickry. Neil, thank you so much. My brilliant pundits tonight, Annunciata, Nigel and Neil. I've really enjoyed your company as well all weekend. We're back on Friday at 9. Thanks to Dominique and the team for doing a great job. Headliners is next. Have a great week.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel. Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day.